The events of September 11th, 2001. Imagine yourself as an adult going to work on what you assume will be a normal day and having it end as one of the most traumatic days of your life. This was the case for many citizens of the United States on September 11th, 2001. This historical event is one of the most widely known events in the world. This particular event is significant because it was considered a turning point for the U.S. and brought people together in a time of grief. The Twin Towers are the tallest buildings in New York City. As stated in FAQs on the 9/11 Memorial website, both buildings had 110 stories, standing about 1,300 feet tall. On September 11, 2001, 19 terrorists from an Islamic extremist group, Al-Qaeda, hijacked 4 different planes in flight. 2 of these planes crashed into each of the Twin Towers. One crashed into the U.S. Pentagon, and the final one was headed for the White House or U.S. Capitol, but was taken over by passengers and crashed into a field. At 8:46 a.m., the first crash occurred into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Just over 15 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., the second plane crashed into the South Tower. All passengers on these 2 flights were killed instantly. Shortly after, at 9:37 a.m., the third flight crashed into the Pentagon, killing all passengers and 125 civilian and military personnel in the building, as recorded by the UVA Miller Center timeline from September 11th. Around 10 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed, and the 4th and final hijacked plane crashed into an empty field in Pennsylvania. Next, at 10:28 a.m., the North Tower collapses. This sent the city of New York into panic as firefighters and first responders flooded the scene to try to help in any way possible. Air Force One also rushed to the scene. The rest of the day was filled with shock and panic. Citizens in New York wanted to get away from the scene and go into hiding as they feared what would come next. Throughout the day, around 8 more buildings surrounding the World Trade Center collapsed due to damage from the towers around them crashing. Schools and work around the nation turned to the news to get information on what was happening. Our president at this time, George W. Bush, addressed the nation at 8:30 p.m. The website of the White House Archives gives his full speech where he refers to the attacks as evil, despicable acts of terror. He talks about the acts intending to frighten the nation, but failed as citizens cared for strangers to help in any way they could. Bush wanted to get help to anyone in need and establish that the government would continue functioning as they searched for who was behind this tragedy. He asks for prayers and states, "This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before and will do so this time." None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. In the days following the attack, the George Bush Library states, President Bush assessed the damage in Washington and New York, directed military and civilian response efforts, acknowledged the work of first responders, and comforted a grieving nation. As our nation grieved this tragedy, people gathered from all over to mourn losses, volunteer, and support their country. Overall, there were almost 3,000 people killed and 6,000 injured on this day, so it's not a quick or easy recovery. To conclude, this event is one of the most terrible acts towards the United States that has ever occurred. Lives were not only lost, but first responders and survivors continued to develop PTSD, respiratory issues from the smoke, cancers, and more in years to follow. Although this event was traumatic, it brought our nation together to change for the better. Airport security was increased, strangers gathered to comfort each other in times of need, and the nation grew stronger as a whole. It has been over 23 years since this event, and there is now a memorial in New York where the towers once stood, where citizens can see photos and listen to phone calls from this day and honor those who lost their lives. September 11, 2001 is a day that will never be forgotten and changed our nation drastically.